All right, everyone. Welcome back to the pod. We're Lucas and I just finished playing Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice on Xbox, and we wanted to give a little breakdown, what we thought, what we liked, that kind of stuff. Um, so yeah, it was honestly probably. I mean, the game's about 8 hours long. It was probably the most interesting game I've ever played.
Yeah, definitely not what I was expecting. Definitely.
but but I think ultimately I was happy enough with how it went that I want to try out the second game, right?
Yeah.
So
So
you
I
go for it.
uh,
Give a little synopsis. Go for it.
yeah. I mean, so basically, for those who don't know, Hellblade: Senua Sacrifice came out in like 2017. I don't remember. I have to look that up, fact check that. Um, but it's basically about this. So you start off, and there's a bunch of like voices that are kind of like going through the air. You're like, okay, interesting. Like it wasn't it wasn't like a different start to a game. But then you get into you kind of see the protagonist Senua, right? She is in this canoe, and there's just voices kind of like speaking to her. And right off the bat, I was like, "This girl's like schizophrenic. She's losing her mind." And so I was like, "Okay, this is already an interesting playthrough." I was like, "This is gonna be an interesting game." So as we're going through, right? I mean, the story is all about this. Senua lost her love, and there was some like angry Vikings, like Northmen is what they call them in the game, that came and basically killed him, or to her carried him off to Helheim. And the game is all behind. It's got a lot of Norse mythology um, background to it, with a little bit of like if its own stuff sprinkled in there. And basically, it's just a journey of her trying to get past her own fears and the things that she went through and the trauma that she's gone through her life, so that she can save the one person that's showed kindness to her and who's actually loved her in the end, right? And so this game, it was cool seeing the progression towards the end, because you kind of see the beginning. She's this scared, frail girl. She's like really, really strong and fighting, but like mentally frail. And you see like these voices are kind of like chewing her out, like telling her how awful she is and how she's gonna die and how like she's not worth anything. And so to me, that was a different take on it, because I've never played a game kind of that basically one of its main points is talking about like mental health. So it was an interesting aspect to it.
Yeah. Well, and the game was like 80% puzzle, 20% combat. Usually the games we're playing are 80% combat, 20% puzzle. And so to have that change, it was like instead of me going into an area to the next area of the game and being like, okay, who's the big boss I'm gonna have to fight? It was like, okay, what puzzle am I gonna have to solve to get to the next part of the game? It was like
Right.
the whole game was a maze, right? And
Right.
I thought the mazes were, it had its trickiness, but they were all so unique. Every different room had a different thing where you had to walk through barrier, you had to walk through like whatever it's called. What are they called? Like,
Like the little like shrines, or I guess the little like mystical gates or something that kind of like
yeah,
change
the
perception.
gates. Yeah, something like that. You had to walk through them in certain ways to make what you when you walk through it had a different appearance, right? Like something was blocked in one view, but when you walk through the gate, it's available to climb in the other view, right? And so you have to follow the series of puzzles around to, you know, unlock the next area, right? And so you start off the game so slow, right?
Especially
So
you, Jason.
slow. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So when I say that, like obviously it starts with puzzles and like you don't know what the heck is happening, but you start off slow in the sense that I didn't understand that you have to hold a button to sprint. So I was just walking like the most slow walk ever for like 25 minutes of the game, the first 25 minutes. Cause I just assumed like, oh, there's no sprint. Like I can't just click in L3. Like all right, like what is this, right? And so we're just trudging along for 25 minutes, and then I look up the controls, and it's like, oh no, you have to hold a button, and then you can start sprinting. So I texted Lucas immediately, and I was like, dude, read the controls before you start, bro.
Yeah.
So yeah, it started off super slow, and then you build on the fact that I don't know what's happening really, and it's just these random puzzles. And then once you get through the puzzle, you fight these enemies that have no meaning to you. You don't really understand who they are, you know. And so that kind of was it was kind of a drag to start, honestly, because like I never played a mental health game. I never had to walk around for the whole part of the game. The controls are really off. Like that was the biggest takeaway for the game for me in a negative light was like they got to figure out how to get these like basic controls figured out.
Right.
But what do you think? What do you think about all that?
Yeah, so controls definitely were a drag. I think it definitely it definitely dated itself in a sense, but it's funny because it didn't come out in the last it came out last decade and it definitely shows, but it was like a late decade release. And that was the crazy part to me because I'm like, this there are other games that can have like better controls than this, right? But like you said, it was a lot slower, and I guess in for story aspect, it did kind of help the game a little bit, kind of understand what's going on, kind of like instead of just breezing past it and being done with the game. Um, but the cool part about it was it kind of it there was so much mystery behind what was going on, and there's parts of the games where you'll see like little lore markers where you have to focus on them, and then this narrator basically tells you kind of stories of either his life or of the Northmen or of different mythological stories, like mythological yeah, like legends basically. And so it was cool because that added a little bit more depth to the game because it gave you kind of it it let the world still be open but kind of narrowed you into like, okay, this is what's going on, right? Like this is it built the world, the tiny world that you had, and made it feel a lot bigger than it was. So I think it was all of that kind of helped with the world building. But yeah, it was a drag. It took me like I was basically like, okay, let's go, Senua. Like pick up the pace, gotta get going, right? And it was funny because like during some of the scenes, you get to a point like post combat, right? You for your first fight, where you find out that there's a cool mechanic in the game. There's a permadeath mechanic, which is the more you die, the more this like darkness will creep up to you, and if it gets to Senua's head, you have to start the game over again. So to me, I was like, okay, there's a real risk to dying, so um, you have to be really careful with your blocking, your dodging, your parries, and all of that stuff, especially when there's multiple enemies. And that was a really cool mechanic. And but then we find out that that's actually not really a permadeath mode, right? It actually
Yeah.
wasn't a thing. Like the more you die, it doesn't matter how many times you die, it'll still continue the game. So I don't know. I thought that was super cool. But kind of going back, one of the challenges that you see Senua like sprinting, like she's just trying to get out of like this mirage that she's in. And I'm like, if you have that speed, why aren't you running like that all the time? And so that was kind of like my biggest thought was like, why are you getting to this, right? Like, why can't you use this mechanic that you have, but you don't not in the game? So
Yeah. Well, you brought up my favorite part of the game, which was the combat. Like one of the most successful, or what is the word? One of the most um, wonderful parries. If you like, it feels so good when you parry, and it's not even
that's
that
true.
hard of a parry, right? So it's not like a Souls game where and it's an impossible parry, and when you get it, like there's this boost in anything, right? No, it's like basically if you parry in this game, you get a free hit. But it's very satisfying. That's the word I was looking for. It's satisfying to get a good parry, and it made it fun. It made me excited to finish the puzzle so that I could, start fighting and show that she actually was like, strong and capable of taking down these enemies, right? Um, we also, I need to clarify a little bit on the controls because I think the sprint was the only control I had a real beef with. But I liked some of the other ways new aspects to puzzle solving. Like when I one of the puzzles, you have to walk around on a tree, and you have to lean. Your controller can't like your control. It's not like gyroscopics with a controller where like you can lean it this way, but it's like if your L3 or your R3 leans too far to the right or left, you'll fall off the ledge, almost like a tightrope, right? You have to stay balanced when you're moving forward. And so I actually fell off one time, and I didn't realize that like, hey, that was like something that they measured when you were progressing on the branch or the tightrope. Like, hey, you gotta like actually like stay straight on or you're gonna die. And so I thought that was a very interesting mechanic that I've never played in a game like that. Usually you could just hold it forward in any direction and it's gonna take you exactly where you need to go, right? So, but yeah, I loved the combat. I thought the combat was so fun. Like I ultimately what kept me going through the game was like I'm gonna get through this puzzle so then I can go fight the next boss because I felt like the bosses were all unique and they had different fighting sets. Whereas, Sen was super limited. We had only a few basic attacks we could do the whole game. You can use like specials where you slow down time and get some free hits in based on how much parrying you're doing. Um, but a lot of different enemies with shields where you had to do brute force attacks instead of hitting with the sword, or a lot of dodging. Felt a little bit like God of War, but obviously God of War is way more fast paced. It was just such a slow. She's just slow, right? That's like the whole thing we've been talking about. Is like it was just slow, and
Yeah,
so. But overall, I did like the combat. It felt unique.
yeah, I agree with you on that. I think it. I guess with the sense of like the enemies, right? There was different type of enemies, and like towards the end of the game, we get introduced to like a big brute character, right? And some quick, fast-paced characters, and so there was a lot of dynamic range in like enemies that you fight, like between the normal grunts, the shields, all that stuff, and even the bosses too. I think each of them had super like their own kind of like cool characteristics between Valravn and Surtur, right? Or how they say it in the game, Sort. And I thought that was a cool aspect. Again, I like Norse mythology and I've followed it a lot growing up, and so it's cool to have those kind of aspects into it. And so I think that kind of made the story a little bit more intriguing for me. So I'm like, oh, she's going to Helheim, so it's like Norse mythology. I immediately thought about that, and I thought about like, oh, who are we going to encounter? Right? Are we going to see Garm, who is like the like hound of hell, basically the protector there, right? We're gonna see Fenrir, who it's like her brother, and all that stuff. Like where I was like excited to see more of these creatures and see like what we were going to encounter. And so the Norse narrative was something that kept me playing the game and overall made it feel a little bit more like intriguing for me to say. But
Yeah.
I'm curious to see
Well,
what captures you about the narrative.
yeah. I think the narrative, like I think the story for me that was the most captivating in the last hour and a half stretch. You're in Helheim, making your way towards the final boss, right? And the puzzles are a little bit different. You have to stand in lighted areas. Um, it's weird. I don't even know how to describe it with the puzzles, but like the bridge is out and you have to stand in certain locations and see it at a certain angle to repair the bridge. And it's got I don't even know how to describe it other than that, right?
Right.
Is you have to make your way through the maze of the ruins and look at everything in the right spots to get the bridge to come back together. And then the boss fight at the end, where you actually can't win. You just keep fighting till you die. Um, and then ultimately, it ends up where you survive because you become what's her face? What's the name of it? Her
Hella.
Hella. Yeah, yeah. You become
Yeah.
Hella, and so your journey doesn't end, right? Because the whole point is she needs to get back to Helheim to save. She can go back there and find her lover, right? And ultimately she fails, but she's still alive, and so we're excited to see where her journey can continue from there. Now being alive, but like being different now, almost reborn in a way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And it's cool because, like, again, we talked a little bit about the progression of the story. At the beginning, her voices are super, super negative. But as the story goes on and she's like, it captures different elements of things that she has to overcome and get like progressed through. And slowly but surely, the voices become a little bit more encouraging, right? Like I remember there was one time where it's like, oh, there's like we're in the mountain and it's like dark and she has like a torch and they're like, oh, she's gonna die. Like the Garm is gonna kill her. She's gonna die. But then one of the other voices is like, no, she can do it. She's strong enough, right? And so you have these voices that are kind of like always tearing at her personally, but she gets better and she starts like fighting against it. To the point where at the end she ends up getting past it and leaving the voices in the past. And so all of that was like super cool. Funny enough, you mentioned the fight, the final battle. I was actually on the mic with Jason, and I had my volume down a little bit, so I was only hearing him speak, and I wasn't really hearing the game. And so I'm literally there for like 10, 15 minutes fighting all these bosses, and I'm like all these guys, and I'm like, why am I not like? There has to be something that I'm doing wrong. So I try to go and attack Hella, nothing. She like sends me back flying, right? And I'm like, what is happening? And then there's a lull in our conversation, and I can hear the game, and the voices just say super clearly, like, just give up, just let go of the battle. And I was like, oh, well, here I go. I'm sitting here fighting for endless waves. I'm destroying all of these different enemies, and I'm like still not knowing what to do. And so that was a cool aspect of the game where it's like she's been fighting for so long that she just needs to let go and kind of let life take her. And so I thought otherwise like this at the beginning I will give my initial thoughts. I thought I'm like I do not want to play this game. This is kind of a burden. This is not fun. It's boring. But yeah, like you said, Jason, the last like hour and a half, that's when things really picked up, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, like this is actually really interesting. I want to see more of what's going on. So, yeah,
Give it a
I
score.
thought give it a score. Um, it's well, this is so tough because it's like um because like comparing it to other games, I can't compare it to other games because I'm gonna put it way down on the list. But in its own right, in its own storyline, I would probably give it like a 7.5 and an 8, which is high because high for me because I'm like I wasn't really enjoying it, but the story got intriguing at the end. I just wish it was a little bit more intriguing during the story, during the major part of it, instead of being intriguing at the last like 10, last like hour of the game, So I officially I'll give it an 8. I'll be a little bit more generous and give it an 8 because I'm excited. It excites me to see what they're going to come up with the next game, right? I think
Yeah.
the next game's called like Senua's Revenge or something. Let's see, Hellblade 2. Uh Senua's Saga. So that sounds even more like okay, she's like the game is starting, right? Like her it hasn't ended. Like the first game wasn't the end of her story. It's the beginning, and we're gonna see where it goes with that.
Yeah. I'm a little bit harsher than you because I'm gonna dock it like 2.5 for the slowness and the bad controls.
Pacing.
And then another point. What does that put it at? Yeah, another point for the game taking 6 hours for me to like want to play it more because it was slow. Like the puzzle, a lot of the puzzles were a little excessive, and it just took forever to get to that last part where I was like, "Oh wow!" So I'm gonna go 6.5 out of 10. The combat and the storytelling really carried it to a 6.5. And I was honestly for the first 6 hours of the game, I was like, this might be the first game I've played that I can say like I didn't like. Like I was like, what am I playing? And then it like turned up in the end. I was like, oh wow, like this is actually I am intrigued for Hellblade 2. Like I'm gonna pay for a month of Game Pass to play that game. So I thought Ninja Theory did a great job. They actually just leaked some photos from the game that's coming out in May. We're gonna drop this video in May, close to the release date of Hellblade 2. So, but yeah, I was definitely intrigued by the end, and I'm excited to see where it's going. So yeah, a little bit harsher, I feel like, but that's because the overall game, I can't give the last hour and a half a bump compared to the 6 hours prior that 7 hours prior that made me even question like should we even keep playing this game.
Right.
But
Fair.
the mental health and the her progression, her narrative, and what she's going to be doing in this next game. Because that's originally why we even played the game. Is I saw the trailer for Hellblade 2, and I said, Lucas, watch this trailer. Like, this actually looks pretty good, and it's the second game that's come out. So let's try the first game and see if it's worth our time. And we both were so skeptical through the first 6 hours of the game, and then it ended up being like, okay, I actually want to see what's happening next. So, yeah, that's what I'd give it. But any last thoughts?
No, I'm excited to see what they do. Hopefully, they listen and kind of make it a little bit better on the pacing a little bit quicker. That's my one ask.
Yeah.
Other than that, I'm excited to see it.
But the thing too is everyone's been worshiping the game. We watched the reviews. The IGN gave it a 9. People loved it, and it was a lot for the narrative, right? Like the story, which makes sense. We loved the story.
Yeah.
But I don't know how Jedi Fallen Order with average mechanics to the average person. I love them, but that gets a 9 out of 10. But then a game that literally it's just such a different feel for a video game. Gets the same rating, and so I was like, I wonder. I'm curious what they're going to listen to and what they're not going to listen to for this next game. So, we're obviously going to play it. It's good enough that we want to play the second one, and we'll be here to review it. So,
agreed.
Yeah. Anything else?
Nope. I'm good. Catch us in the second one.
Yep. Catch us in the next one.
Peace.